So I know most of you, but in case you don't know me, I'm Myosho Ginny Matthews, and I've been in this Sangha for 49 years. I just realized. Um, my talk today is the physicality of Zen practice, which I think is very ironic because I am not with you in physicality. This is a new way of our being together. And I wonder what those old Zen masters in China would have thought of talking about the physicality of Zen remotely through these screens. So I think it's a very interesting way of being right now. Now, of course, I actually am not going to talk about the more obvious physicalities of Zen practice, which is our zazen with our breath, our chanting, where the breath becomes a sounding, kinhin, where we walk mindfully and often and in step, at least in this practice, in our practice, and samu, where we put our zazen into work, action and work. Those are all incredibly skillful means of embodying or manifesting our Buddha nature in action or stillness. And my dear Dharma brother, Keegan Osho, is going to talk next week about what is posture, what is breath, which is very concerned with the physicality of this practice. So what I'm going to talk about is something a little different. Well, it's not that different, but I'm going to talk about when I encountered this practice, in this particular teachings, and my teacher, Joshu Roshi, in 1973. And at that time, I think our teacher was really trying to physicalize the practice, embody the practice. I think he had all these recent college graduates who arrived at his doorstep who were completely in their heads. And he was really coming up with these images or descriptions to get us into our centers, what he would call the center of gravity. So that was a big part of our teaching was about the center of gravity. And only later did I realize that it was in Chinese and in Asian in general, Asian teachings, it was the hara, and particularly the tanden, that part of the hara, which is an actual measurable physical place. The center of gravity is measurable in everyone. It's a slightly different with everyone. It's approximately 2 inches below the navel, halfway between the front of the abdomen and the spine, the back. And it is truly our connection to the planet. So when I encountered these teachings, I actually had a little leg up, so to speak, on these teachings because I had trained as a dancer for 10 years at that point, possibly. And I was very familiar with the center of gravity. Dancers know that unless you can connect with that center, you cannot balance on one leg for ages and ages. You cannot do multiple turns without, spinning yourself off the stage. And you can't also defy the center of gravity with the extraordinary elevations that dancers develop through strength and training to actually fly into the air and actually experience, which I have, that nanosecond where you are released from the center of gravity, which makes it a very addictive. Dancers love to leap around because of that wonderful feeling as I say, it's a nanosecond, but it's a nice nanosecond of being released from the center from gravity. So when our teacher talked about that, it was very familiar to me. Now, of course, he would say Buddha is the center of gravity, your Buddha nature. So that was a new look at my center of gravity, or the center of gravity. And it was in Zen practice that I truly experienced the Buddha nature as my center of being. And so even right from the beginning, which I think is a little rare in our, because as I said, I was so familiar and Roshi was always talking about center of gravity. I knew that when I entered the Sanzen room, I was entering with my belly button. He would say that, you know, throw your belly button or listen to the bird with your belly button. So whenever I entered into the Sanzen room, I was moving from that center. It was a great skillful means also in Zazen. Whenever I found myself spinning out with my thoughts, or I think the first 2 years of Zazen was getting all the popular songs out of my head. I think I went through every Bob Dylan song, every Beatles song, but I learned that I didn't have to go through all the lyrics. As soon as I realized I was hearing them, I would drop my mind into my belly. And Roshi would talk about that, dropping your mind. And now, of course, Shin, or kokoro in Japanese, mind is mind-heart. It's not just the brain mind, it's your whole being, your whole sense of being. Into the belly, drop it into the belly. It was extremely, and still is, extremely skillful means to stop the spitting out of thoughts and following those thoughts. So to me, that's a very physical means of entering Zen practice, is through this belly, through the tanden, through the now I've forgotten that word. Oh, hara, through the hara. And of course, you know, there were other physical practices that particularly helped me. The one practice I didn't mention when I went through our litany is the bowing practice. So bowing practice, I also gravitated to very early on, especially by experiencing my other participants, their bows, you know, there was sort of communicative, how people bowed. It was just a physical expression. It was such a pure physical expression. And I really learned a lot from that. And then I realized too, well, I think Kwang Roshi, who was visiting with us on one of these Sunday talks, talked about bowing as that's impossible not to let go, not to exhale, not to release yourself when you bow. It just, the physicality of it calls for that. So it is again very skillful means to let go of the self. And then I also understood that when you bow, this center, which we often end up in, comes down to the same level as your center of gravity. And that is also an important tool to get back into your hara, into that place. Another physical, to me, was a physical practice. It still is. Koju mentioned at his talk at the last Zazenkai about that moment when you wake up from sleep, and there could be a moment before the personal self, that what Roshi would call the I am self forms. It can be one of those nanoseconds, And that's a very important experience of that no self, no consciousness at that moment. So Roshi talked about that also in my early practice. He said that was a very important experience and a very important time. And he encouraged us to use that as a practice. So being very physically fit and being in my early 20s, when I would be at sesshin, those of you who have been at sesshin, there's this very horrible moment when the shoji comes around and rings this god-awful bell to wake you up. I took on the practice that I would immediately just jump out of bed without thinking, no thinking. That was another Roshiism, no thinking. And also at once. So at once I was often on the top bunk. So I was just amazed I didn't kill myself, but I did manage to climb down, and I could, and the practice was, I was not aware of my being until sometimes I hit the floor with my feet. And I tried to keep watching this. And of course, the trick was then I would wake up before the bell because my body was anticipating it. But I do remember that practice as being just a wonderful, experience of there is a no self that can still climb down from a bunk bed. So I'm going to check my time on this funny, maybe I'll check it here. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to bring in as a physical practice is something we don't talk about much, but was very prevalent in Roshi's early teachings, and that is laughter. Laughter is an expression of the hara. You hear the term belly laugh. It happens here in your belly. And Roshi, I think when he came to America, I think he felt we were just way too serious. He kept saying that he had come to America to teach us how to laugh. And he also said, and I taught Alan Watts how to laugh, which is, if you ever read Alan Watts, he does talk a lot about laughter. I mean, laughter is a release. It's a no self moment. It's a definitely not take yourself seriously moment. When you're laughing, you're not in a contracted and serious state. So, and it's also, as they found out, a healing process. If you've ever read that book of the doctor who healed himself watching Marx Brothers movies. So laughter was very important for Roshi, and I think we did take ourselves very seriously. I know I did. Though I do remember my first seichu being in the sewing cabin with a monk and another practitioner. And I don't know how or why, but we always end up laughing, deeply laughing many times. And I remember even then realized that this was an important release. And, Roshi always wanted us to have an opportunity to let go and to release. And he did that a lot that's why he loved hot springs. Hot springs is a wonderful, or we had that wonderful hot jacuzzi at Baldy for a while, is a time to let go, to melt, to release those tensions that do accumulate. So laughter is a great way to do it. And I realized that was probably what was happening in the sewing cabin. And I also realized that even though when I went into Sanzen and I did my koan very purely and from my belly and usually non-verbally, if I once I presented my koan and I was back to, I think I was my I am self, there was always this self-consciousness. There was like, oh gosh, once again, I didn't get it. Or, Roshi would say 60%. And I go, oh gosh, I'm just not getting it. A lot of self-consciousness. And it took about 20 years that at one of those sanzens, and I presented it, and I came out of it and realized that it was a completely ridiculous and ludicrous expression of this koan. And I just started laughing and laughing. And Roshi looked at me like, oh, finally, finally, you have broken through that self-consciousness. So laughter was that tool to break through. So I'm gonna, there's only one more thing, and then there'll be time for questions if you have any. I want to bring your attention to this book. Oops, I don't know if it comes out backwards. It's called Mind, Body, Zen. And it was written by a longtime student of Sasaki Roshi, who was ordained, I think, in 2006. And his name is Hokaku Jeffrey Maitland. And Hokaku became one of the foremost Rolfers in the world, basically in the world. He truly dived deep and got it. And he always says that Roshi was totally instrumental in his life, not only in the Rolfing, but his entire life. Very, very grateful for his encounter. And there is a chapter here called The Zen of Sitting and Walking, which I think is the most excellent look at posture and breath from someone who was deeply knowledgeable about the body. But the other thing that he did in this book, which Roshi did give him permission, was to collect anonymous stories of Sanzen encounters, which I find really endearing, and I find that really precious and very helpful too. So I want to read one of those because it relates to what I was just talking about. And that will probably be my last thing. A Zen student had been working for several years on the koan, "How do you realize your true nature when you see a dog?" During a session, he was sure he had at last found the answer. Enraptured with his discovery, he ran to the Sanzen waiting room and quietly waited, but in wild anticipation, until his turn finally came. Like a locomotive with a full head of steam, he burst into the Sanzen room where Roshi was waiting, poised as an I knew I would, well, as a mountain of silence. Completely ignoring the obligatory bows and other formalities, he exclaimed, "Roshi, Roshi, I got the answer. I finally got the answer." Roshi showed no reaction, neither approving nor disapproving of his student's announcement. The student hesitated, and Roshi indicated that he should answer the koan. The student got down on all fours and barked. Unmoved, Roshi said nothing. The student was beside himself and said, "Roshi, did I pass?" Roshi said, "Come close." The student moved closer, again imploring Roshi. He asked, "Did I pass or not?" Again, Roshi said, "Come closer." Befuddled, he moved closer and blurted out, "Roshi, Roshi, did I pass?" And Roshi reached out, petted his knee, and sweetly said, "Good doggy." The student was completely undone by Roshi's response. He fell into unbridled, billowing laughter that lasted for 30 minutes. So in that sense, too, laughter was his answer to the koan. And I just love that interchange of good doggy. So thank you for listening to my encounters with the physicality of Zen practice from my point of view. And there's going to be many opportunities to hear from others of their, as we said, no, next, I keep pointing to the corner where Keegan Osho is sitting on the screen. He will be talking about, I think the title is, What is Posture? What is Breath? Zen 101 next week. So if you have any questions, I'm really happy to answer them.